Welcome to Protagonist Pub. My name is Tammy, and this is where characters gather. And today, I'm doing something that I haven't done before, and it was inspired by Anne over in Search of Wonder, and I will link her channel down below. And she has this ongoing series which she calls Deep Thoughts, and she tackles a subject that interests her in depth, be it a book, a theme. So this was inspired by Anne. And this is going to be a bit of a rant. And I will understand if you don't stick around for it, but I need to get this off my chest. It has been bothering me for years now. And in the last year or so, it has become a much deeper problem in the books I've been picking up. And that is, I don't even know how to describe it without coming afoul of censors. So if I tap doubts around the subject, that's why. But it's the whole, I have thin skin, and so whatever bothers me has no place in fiction. Or if it doesn't meet said alphabet soup categorization, it doesn't deserve to be read. Or I need a safe space, so please put all the possible trigger warnings for every single book in the description of the book. So I have a theme of what's going to go on here. Since humans had time immemorial, humans have processed what goes on in their lives and happens to them as a family, as a clan, as a tribe, as a nation, through stories. You see it in cave paintings, and we have been passed down tales, Tale of Gilgamesh, the Bible. They all started as oral traditions. And as mankind developed language and the ability to write, those stories were committed to permanent form, be it they on a stone tablet or vellum, parchment. Mankind processes everyday struggles, life-changing events, trauma through stories. Yes, those stories are partially history. They are also undoubtedly, as time passes, they get embellished and elaborated upon. And that's how humans have always processed what happens in their lives. They didn't shy away from it. They didn't say, oh my gosh, I need to be protected from this particular story because it might make me feel bad about myself. Or it isn't something I need to hear. Humans process events through stories. We tell them to our friends. We tell them to our family. We read about them. We share them. We write them. What we don't do as a species is say, oh, protect me from that because it's scary. And unfortunately, the it's scary has come to dominate fiction in ways that are very, very detrimental. And it is very, it's pathetic. I just, it's pathetic. If you don't want to read content and you don't want to expand your horizons, how are you ever going to move past content that may or may not be personally relevant to you and deal with said issue if you're afraid to look at it head on? And if it makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's something you need to read to get comfortable. Now, on a personal note, I don't care if you're, green, purple, pink, white, black, brown. I don't care what you are as an author. Whatever color your skin pigmentation may be has nothing to do with your ability to write a story. And I'm not going to read a said author because of their skin pigmentation. You can either write a book and write it well, or you cannot. Same goes for alphabet soup. I don't care. That is your personal business. I don't care. Leave it behind the door of your house where it belongs, where everybody's belongs. I don't care. You either can write a book or you cannot. And life is a struggle. And we all go through stuff. And we all have events that mold and shape us. And those events make us who we are today. And no life is lived in this vacuum little bubble of perfect safety in which no bad things happen. And if you can't read about somebody else's struggles, and you always have to be able to identify with characters, your reading selection is going to be extraordinarily narrow. And I feel sorry for you. And so in particular, there's a very big problem with the depiction of women in fiction. And it is really recent. It is within the last 20 years or so. And I am going to blame my generation for raising, not so much my generation, some of my generation and some of my parents' generation, for raising the authors who have capitulated to this and who have raised, and I'm going to talk about women in particular here, women in particular, to be so fragile that they just cannot actually function in reality. And I don't understand the dichotomy. Women reviewers and authors and protagonists in fiction seem to want to be cuddled and protected and cherished and live in this little vacuum bubble of safety. And yet they step outside their front door and they're screaming for equality and how they're oppressed by men and how life isn't fair and I should get everything I want because I'm a woman, and they've always been oppressed through society. And it's utter nonsense. And we all know, if you've watched this channel for last year, you all know I have zero tolerance for weak women in fiction. I cannot, I do not understand it. I cannot tolerate it. I will DNF a book with weak, anxiety-riddled women just in a heartbeat. And the last month, I have had one book after another with anxiety. And they don't have to be like that. There are plenty of books with incredibly strong women in all genres, secular, Christian, fantasy, you name it, they exist. So why are we continuing to purchase and read authors who write nothing but anxiety-filled women who can't look at their own shadow and not go running away? It's just, as you can tell, it's a very sore spot for me. So so today I thought I would give some examples of books I thought were just riddled with bad characters and bad, anxiety just oozes off the page. And then I'm going to contrast it with obviously far more books, because I DNF said anxiety-riddled books that have strong characters in a multitude of genres. So first we're going to do the DNF books. And one of them I actually finished. And it's a recent read, so you will have seen this review. That is The Lady in Residence by Allison Pittman. This is a book in the Doors to the Past series, which are a bunch of standalone novels, but all have dual timeline and are all in the same series. And in this case, our main character, what's her name? Dinny, is so anxiety-riddled that it's amazing she can function. And I've already ranted about this book. You don't need to hear me rant about it again. And you heard me talk about this one this week. I'll link the video down below. That is Aiming for Love by Mary Connealy. This book had a multitude of problems, as discussed in the video down below. But the whole trope of, oh, you're the first human male I've ever seen outside my little bubble, and I'm going to fall in love with you, A, is unrealistic for romance. B, there was so much anxiety and trauma involved in these characters that, no. You don't need to hear me rant on that one again. So, another couple examples. He Should Have Told the Bees by Amanda Cox. I had this on Galley last year. I read well over half of this book, and it was a DNF. I kept reading, hoping this book would get better. It has two female protagonists. Both of them have trauma and anxiety, separate and distinct from each other. Both seem incapable of looking life in the face and dealing with it. And this book was just a very hard miss for me. And it just, why? Who wants to read about this stuff? And I DNF'd it over halfway through, and they still hadn't met, and that was the whole premise of the book. So, yeah, no. And then The Golden Girls Road Trip by Kate Galley. This I had in the Net Galley arc too. And in this case, our female protagonist just turned 70. And she was spineless and didn't have the good sense to stand up for herself and tell her family no. And again, DNF'd it. I'm sorry, but if you're 70 and you can't say no when people are pushing you around, your entire life must have been miserable. And I wanted to like that book. I really, really did. However, again, you're 70. You should be more than capable of telling another adult human no. And then the Words We Lost by Nicole Deese. I had this one as Net Galley arc. 2 got DNF'd. This time I DNF'd it much earlier than halfway through. And in this one, our protagonist, her best friend dies, and her boss bullies her into taking a trip she doesn't want to take, to a family event she doesn't want to go to, and she would rather capitulate to her boss than honor her dead best friend's memory and wishes. And I was so infuriated. Really? I mean, really? And that was all I pulled for the DNF pile. I am sure there were far more in my DNF pile, but those were the ones that jumped out at me. And they all have a theme in common. And that is, I am a spineless female who is scared. And I am just going to capitulate and do whatever to keep everybody happy, regardless of my own happiness and my own self-worth. Why? Why would anybody want to read that? That is just, it's infuriating. So, on the example of good women written by amazing people, I obviously have far more choices because those are the books I gravitate towards. But they are also books, I think, that are generally, should be read generally. They don't shy away from it. So, first one is going to be Recorder by Cathy McCrumb. And our protagonist is a female. She does not have a name until the end of the 3rd book, which releases on the 20th of February. And she has had all of her emotions stripped from her through technology. And through the events of this book, she loses the technology that keeps her emotions at bay. Which, if that's all you've ever known, losing suddenly being flooded with emotion is going to be traumatic. Does Recorder sit in a corner and hide? No. Does she focus on herself and cower? No. Does she process and deal with what life has presented her? Yes. Yes, she does. And it is a beautiful story. And everyone should read it. Here's secular fiction. The Seven Sisters by Lucinda Riley. This is the part of the first book in the Seven Sisters series. In the opening chapter of this book, our first sister, who is Maya, her adopted father, dies. And upon the reading of his will, he hands out clues or his lawyer has clues for each of the sisters as to their origin stories. And she has to, deal with the death of her father. And does she really want to go find her birth family? And what does that mean? And will they love her? And there's all kinds of trauma in here. And all kinds of stuff that could just riddle one with anxiety. Does Maya cower in a corner? No. She faces her past. She deals with the trauma. She deals with, possible rejection and everything that happens to her. She doesn't just cower and wait for someone to come save her. She saves herself with the help of others, but she saves herself. What a wonderful example. Next example would be The Innkeeper of Ivy Hill by Julie Klassen. And Jane and Thor in this story are two female protagonists. Our daughter and mother-in-law, they each have to deal with the death of Jane's husband in their own way, the potential loss of the family inn. And I will tell you right now, Jane starts off as a very weak character, riddled with anxiety and people pleasing and, sticking herself in a corner so she doesn't anger anybody else. And that changes as she realizes no one is coming to save her. And if she wants things to get better, she needs to figure out how to make them better with the help of others. Next example, and I will link this review down below, would be Veiled in Smoke by Jocelyn Green. I've talked about this extensively in the video down below, but in here we have fire, we have PTSD, we have traumatic burn injury, we have a murder, we have just potential loss of a business, the whole gamut of possible things that could happen. And do Meg and Sylvie stand in a corner and cower? Nope. They come to realize that they need to face reality head on and deal with life and become so strong within themselves so that they can face up to what life has dealt them. And it's a beautiful story. And I highly recommend it. I really, really highly recommend it. And next up would be In Pieces by Rhonda Ortiz. And our heroine is Molly. And Molly discovers the body of her father who committed suicide. And this is Molly's story. And Molly is a resident in 1783 Boston, and she is an orphan now, and there is no one to protect her but her. And this all comes to a head in the first chapter, and she meets her childhood friend, and Josiah, in the first two chapters, Josiah comes to Molly's aid, and he is there for her. And this is a beautiful story about a woman who has some horrific trauma to deal with. But she doesn't hide from that trauma. She is wise enough at a young age of, I don't even know how old Molly is. I'll say 21. She's probably younger than that. She is wise enough to know she cannot solve all of life's problems by herself. And she asks for help to face her fears. She doesn't want to be protected. She doesn't want, someone else to go fight her demons for her. She faces them head on. And she looks trouble in the face and says, "You are not winning today. And with the help of God and my friends and those who I grew up with, I will survive this." And those are just a couple of examples. And okay, they were like 5 examples. But I probably could have easily pulled 50 more. But there's a very big problem. Why are we, so willing to sustain the, "Hi, here's the trigger warning page for this novel," and then proceed to have such weak female characters? It is infuriating. Women are not weak. Women have never been weak. Women throughout history have not been weak. You want some examples of women throughout history who weren't weak? Okay. Boudica, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Joan of Arc, Abigail Adams. The list is endless. And yet we seem to have this notion that modern women are so oppressed. You're not. Your anxiety isn't unique. You deal through anxiety, you deal through trauma, you deal through past hurts by telling stories, by reading stories, by realizing you didn't go through something in a vacuum and that other people have experienced the same thing. And you shouldn't be afraid to read that. Yes, it may be difficult. Yes, it may cause you to cry. Yes, it may cause you to reflect on things that have happened in your past. But if you don't reflect on the things that have happened in your past, how do you ever deal with them and move forward? Because I promise you, as someone in her 5th decade of life, that the undealt with past comes back to haunt you. And if you don't know how to deal with things, you aren't going to know how to deal with things when you're even older, and life doesn't get any easier just because you're older. Life is difficult for everyone. No one leads a charmed and easy life in a bubble. If you exist in a bubble, in a vacuum, how do you learn to relate to people? How do you learn to have empathy? How do you express yourself in a coherent manner if you're so scared of speaking to somebody because they might trigger you or do a laughable microaggression? It's just nonsense. Women are not weak. Weak female characters need to die a fiery death. We need to stop accepting them as women. We need to stop demanding trigger warnings for everything. We need to stop this self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety and demanding unequal treatment while screaming for equality outside our front doors. We need to suck it up. And there are so many examples throughout history, in great literature, in popular fiction, in Christian fiction, in secular fiction, in any genre you like, of strong women, of beautifully written, strong women. And they may not start off strong. I'll give you an example of one that doesn't start off strong. The Do-Over by Sharon Peterson. And Percy. She starts off as an incredibly weak character who quickly discovers that if I'm going to change my life, it's up to me to change my life. And she proceeds to do it over the course of a year. Percy doesn't start off strong, but by golly, is Percy a strong character by the end of that book. And there is no reason that this trend of anxiety-riddled women needs to continue in popular fiction, in Christian fiction, in any fiction, great fiction, literature. It just toss it out the trash can. Stop reading this stuff. It's not healthy. It's not good. Humankind processes emotions via stories. It has been true since the beginning of humans. It will be true until the end of time. That is how humans tell what happens to them. That is how humans learn to deal with stuff. So, thank you for coming for my first deep dive. This has been my TED Talk. I'm sure there are comments down below. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time at the Protagonist Pub.